Okay. Good morning. Morning to those of you in our sanctuary and to those of you viewing us online. I'm Charles Thomas. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint. We are a progressive community in which people are free to be themselves without fear. If you would like more information about Unitarian Universalism or our congregation, please feel free to talk with one of our ministers, and their contact information can be found online at uuflint.org. Once again, uuflint.org. If you are a visitor today and would like to receive our weekly email newsletter, you may sign up at our website, or you may scan the QR code on the order of service, or you can complete the card in the seat backs you find here in the sanctuary. And this is what I'm talking about, the card in the seat back. Our announcements are on the back of your order of service, and I hope you will take a minute to read them. Are there any additional announcements from the pews? If not, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our speaker today. I think it's going to be a really valuable, exciting, interesting service. Milner is a social worker who has been in the field since he started working as a peer mentor at the Common Ground Sanctuary Runaway Shelter when he was 16 years old. In the intervening decades, he has served in numerous roles in the field of social work, from case management with homeless and severely mentally ill populations, to working with survivors of child sexual abuse, to working at a school for young people with special needs. Eitan obtained his master's degree in social work at the University of Michigan School of Social Work and spent subsequent time focusing on crisis-oriented services and helping clients to heal from post-traumatic stress. Eitan then had the unexpected opportunity to integrate his personal experiences As someone who was raised by a father and brother with autism and a mother with ADHD, into his work at the Looking Glass Community Services Center Point School in Eugene, Oregon. For 9 years, Eitan served as a therapist at the Center Point School, and this experience helped him not only to develop his skills as a therapist, but to learn more about himself and his family as well. Since returning to Michigan, Eitan has worked as a therapist with the goal of implementing an evidence-based practice that is rooted in relationships and helping neurodiverse individuals along their own path of discovery. In the process, Eitan has been able to find that connection, kindness, and compassion are key, not only in how we treat each other, but also how we hold ourselves. So I think we're in for a really exciting, valuable, interesting, inspiring message in a few moments. Now turn to chalice lighting. We light this chalice as a symbol of the love that shines in the human heart. I'd like you to join me in reciting our covenant, which you see on the screen. Recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service, we gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice. The prelude is Once in a Lifetime by the Talking Heads. Good start, Thorpe.
You may find yourself living in a shotgun shack, and you may find yourself in another part of the world, and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile, and you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? Letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. Letting the days go by, water flowing underground into the blue again. After the money's gone, once in a lifetime, water flowing underground. And you may ask yourself, how do I work this? And you may ask yourself, where is that large automobile? And you may tell yourself, this is not my beautiful house. And you may tell yourself, this is not my beautiful wife. Letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. Letting the days go by, water flowing underground into the blue again. After the money's gone, once in a lifetime, water flowing underground. Same as it ever was, 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 same as it ever was. Water dissolving and water removing. There is water at the bottom of the ocean. Under the water, carry the water. Remove water at the bottom of the ocean. Water dissolving and water removing. Letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. Letting the days go by, water flowing underground into the blue again, into the silent water, under the rocks and stones. There is I right? Am I wrong? And you may say to yourself, my God, what have I done? Letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. Letting the days go by, water flowing underground into the blue again, into the silent water, under the rocks and stones. There is water underground. Letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. Letting the days go by, water flowing underground into the blue again.
Monica Bosick will now lead the congregation in singing the hymn that is number 128 in the Singing the Journey hymnal. It's For All That Is Our Life, and Jennifer Howard will play.
Please stand if you're willing and able. I'm very happy to see some people that have been gone for a while. Rose and Don Klein are here today. I'm sorry, I had to say that because I'm very excited to see them. So, yay. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all that is a gift, we are called to use to build the common good and make our own place glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks for all that is our life. For sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks for all that is our lives. For all that is our lives, we sing our thanks and praise. For all that is a gift, which we are called to use, we build the common good and make our own days glad. Thank you so much. Please be seated. I'm glad you're all here today.
Thank you, Bonnie and Jennifer. We'll now observe a few moments of silence, followed by instrumental music, and by an opportunity for those who would like to do so to light candles of joy or concern, either at the front of this room, at this table here, or at the table on the side of the room to my left. You may also write your joy or concern at the table in the back, and it will be included in our church's next weekly e-update online newsletter. So at this time, we'll observe a few moments of silence. We will now have a reading, Neurotribes by Steve Silberman. Our guest speaker, Eitan Milner, will do the reading. It will be followed by a few moments of special music and then by the talk.
Thanks so much. One way to understand neurodiversity is to think in terms of human operating systems instead of diagnostic labels like dyslexia and ADHD. The brain is, above all, a marvelously adaptive organism, adept at maximizing its chances of success even in the face of daunting limitations. Just because a computer is not running Windows doesn't mean that it's broken. Not all the features of atypical human operating systems are bugs. By autistic standards, the quote-unquote normal brain is easily distractible, obsessively social, and suffers from a deficit of attention to detail and routine. Thus, people on the spectrum experience the neurotypical world as relentlessly unpredictable and chaotic, perpetually turned up too loud, and full of people who have little respect for personal space. The main reason why the internet was able to transform the world in a single generation is that it was specifically built to be platform agnostic. The internet doesn't care if your home computer or mobile device is running Windows, Linux, or the latest version of Apple's iOS. Its protocols and standards were designed to work with them all to maximize the potential for innovation at the edges. In recent years, a growing alliance of autistic self-advocates, parents, and educators who have embraced the concept of neurodiversity have suggested a number of innovations that could provide the foundation for an open world designed to work with a broad range of human operating systems. Thank you so much for having me today. We'll start by defining a few terms, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit more about myself. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that affects the way people communicate with and interact with the world. Autism is not related to a person's intellectual capabilities, but their nervous system. As such, it can express itself through over or undersensitization of sensory perception, unconventional styles and needs of communication, and patterns of specialized interests, behaviors, and movements. Autism is referred to as a spectrum and used to be differentiated from what was called Asperger's, or quote-unquote high-functioning autism. Rather than this, contemporary perspectives on autism refer to the spectral nature based on a person's support needs rather than their functioning. Autistic advocates are pushing us to understand the viewpoint that it is not a disorder or a dysfunction, but a neurological lens through which the world is perceived and expressed. It can be challenging and frustrating to autistic individuals for many reasons, but the most common difficulties are found in the outside world: a lack of patience, perspective, and compassion. ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a complex neurological condition that impacts approximately 11% of children and almost 5% of adults in the United States. ADHD is a developmental impairment of the brain's executive functions. People with ADHD can have trouble with impulse control, focusing, and organization. Neuroscience, brain imaging, and clinical research tell us a few important things. ADHD is not a behavior disorder. ADHD is not a mental illness. ADHD is not a specific learning disability. ADHD is instead a developmental facet of the brain's self-management system. both adults and children can be diagnosed with ADHD. Some signs and traits include inattention, issues with focusing, time management challenges, impulse control difficulties, exaggerated emotional responses, hyperfocus, speed of information processing variance, hyperactivity, executive dysfunction. But most importantly, ADHD symptoms vary by individual. Neurodiversity is a term that encompasses both autism and ADHD, but also included in neurodiversity are dyslexia, dyspraxia, and other conditions often referred to as learning disabilities. Some people prefer to refer to individuals as neurodivergent. I'll go ahead and use the term neurodiverse individuals. Now, a little bit about me. Thanks so much, Charles, for the introduction. My name's Eitan. I'm a social worker. I grew up in Michigan. Before I was a social worker, I was the son to an autistic father and a mother with ADHD. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, right next to the Detroit Zoo. My family is an international family, with my father originating in Israel and my mother being from France. Language was so important to me growing up. It was a trilingual household. I note this because I think it relates to how people from different cultures have to adapt to their new lives overseas, away from their families. I liken it to a lot of what we're going to talk about with neurodiversity, and how neurodiverse individuals are often alienated from what is familiar or comfortable to them in the name of integrating into mainstream society. It starts at such a young age, from the moment we're sent off to school, that it seems so normal. Yet it can come at such a great cost to ourselves as well as those we love if we don't try and learn a little bit of their native language. My brother is named Justin Dunn. He is the chief executive and the chair of the board at Autistic Nottingham in England, where he has assisted in creating the disability framework for the entire city. His advocacy for autistic folks has been an inspiration to me, but that inspiration didn't start recently. My brother taught me how to walk around in a city so I didn't get pickpocketed, how to politely decline gross food at my neighbor's house. He was a black belt in Ishinryu karate at age 16 and a concert pianist working on Chopin's etudes at the same time. He speaks 6 languages. It's a lot to aspire to. My father is a physician, and he taught me all about opera. When I was young, I could distinguish between the arias of Beniamino Gigli, Jussi Björling, and Enrico Caruso. He thought Pavarotti was just okay. He'd sit in the dark and listen to opera on our hi-fi system, bobbing his head right and left, a repetitive behavior I now know as stimming. It was a way to self-soothe and channel the natural energy in his body. My dad told me he didn't care what I did, even if I was a garbage collector, just that I should be the best one. In the middle stages of his career, he obtained a master's degree in biostatistics from the University of Michigan and was one of the primary authors of the Gulf War Syndrome study. That eventually made me a legacy and surely helped me with my admission to Michigan. He would play basketball and soccer with me, though it didn't take long for me to start beating him. My mother was a teacher for 30 years at the Roper School in Birmingham, Michigan. She grew up in France and became a French teacher after studying special education and, ironically, autism in her graduate program. The knowledge of autism and development was misguided at the time, rooted in some of the now disproven theories of Bruno Bettelheim, that autism was created by cold and distant parents, quote-unquote refrigerator mothers. My mom was anything but, and she instilled in me a love of reading, always asking me probing questions like, what is culture? She introduced me to Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, Cat Stevens, and French singers like Serge Gainsbourg. She was a brilliant teacher and used innovative teaching strategies like creating a Jeopardy game for her students and connected them to students across the globe at the very dawn of the internet age. With all of these amazing gifts and these specialized interests also came significant challenges. My brother struggled to make friends all through high school, not really cultivating close relationships until he was in college. My father had difficulty communicating with most people and was eventually divorced from my mother. My mother struggled immensely when it was report card time. The whole house was on eggshells, walking in silence so as not to disturb the precarious concentration she'd rarely be able to obtain. And so, when we ask who is neurodiverse, many studies show that 10 to 20% of the population could be accurately described as neurodiverse. Neurodiverse individuals may have adapted or masked their needs in order to avoid seeming different or to fit in during social or family gatherings, perhaps even to obtain and keep jobs. Neurodiversity is often othered in society because of how the different processing speeds and needs and strategies all express themselves. We are often told that autistic people have trouble empathizing with others or understanding the reciprocity of social and emotional needs. But what I've seen in my work and in my family is quite the opposite. Autistic and neurodiverse people are often more in tune. They have to pay such close attention to the nuances and microtransactions of daily living that their resources are depleted much more easily. They need to watch close for how people enunciate, how people interact, how people gesture and emphasize their meaning in conversation. They're often hypersensitive to the small ways of being, even if they're not always adept at perfectly recreating these patterns. I find my autistic clients and my family members to be highly empathetic, highly emotional, and highly sensitive. They just may not operate according to the same interactive languages. For example, someone might be autistic and a brilliant organizer of data. They may have good work habits, but perhaps they're not very chatty and prefer having meaningful conversations rather than exchanging niceties. They're also particularly sensitive to light, especially the droning, fluorescent lights often found in office buildings. The experience of working in the office for this person might be extremely taxing. The sights, the sounds, and the social demands could grate against their very being. It's like asking a neurotypical person to sit in a very hot, sweaty room all day, and instead of putting on the AC, in order to get paid, they have to put on a sweater. Another person with ADHD might be very artistic, expressive, and an extremely creative thinker. They might be able to do incredible amounts of work in just a few hours. However, all the small tasks of getting to work, feeding themselves, communicating their process, these may all take a toll on their ability to focus. They might need several hours a day just to think or explore or do tasks that help them organize their thoughts. They might be able to accomplish the same goals in a completely different way as another coworker. Yet much of their day will have to be devoted to masking these different needs so that they don't seem like the odd one out. They might stay at work well past the point where they've accomplished their goals for the day, depleting their internal resources. When so much of a person's efforts are not embraced in the workplace by peers, by families, or in social situations, so much time is spent on concealing, avoiding who they really are. This is what we call masking. Masking is a phenomenon of self-protection, yet it takes a significant toll on neurodiverse individuals. Masking can often look like suppressing a person's needs to use fidgets or to make hand or body movements to channel their natural energy, engaging in forced conversations that stress or strain the way of their thinking, or forcing themselves into physical environments with sensory stimuli that are difficult to listen to or to process. Masking can also look like forcing oneself into a situation where the person has to push past their natural boundaries, even though their brains are done for the day. This can happen at work, in social situations, even within the family. It can look like irritability, exhaustion, fatigue, and can lead to even more severe outcomes, like burnout. Burnout for autistic folks can often lead to extremes, even situations that mirror conditions like depression, physical illness, or loss of cognitive skills. Burnout is a serious response to the brain being overtaxed and under-rested. But this is not always because of how neurodiverse people act or behave. Sometimes the world asks for neurodiverse individuals to deny their very selves. As my brother says, being neurodiverse is hard because society is made for neurotypical people. But people are starting to see the value of the creativity, the energy, and the out-of-the-box thinking that neurodiversity can lend to any organization or any group. Neurodiverse individuals are innovators. Numerous successful people, such as Albert Einstein and Steve Jobs, were thought to be neurodiverse. Elon Musk and Anthony Hopkins are confirmed to be autistic. Our musical selections today are created by David Byrne from the Talking Heads, who said of his autism, "I relate it to the ability to intensely focus on something. You kind of exclude the other things and really kind of be intensely focused. Maybe somewhat socially awkward, socially uncomfortable a little bit, taking things sometimes very literally, which I still do. But when a person sees the world differently, it can be the very foundation of their innovation." Forbes magazine notes that according to the Harvard Business Review, a case study shows that people with what was once considered Asperger's are more suited to perform thorough and attentive work. They often prefer routine to novelty and exhibit steady focus and repetitive behavior patterns. According to a study from the University of Michigan, people with dyslexia tend to have out-of-the-box thinking. They process information visually and are good at finding hidden connections, making them ideal to discover patterns and trends in data. And according to research published on personality and individual differences, people with ADHD can be more creative compared to their peers. In addition, they work well under pressure. They can tend to be very proactive and can be better at adjusting to change on the fly. They also have the ability to be hyper-focused on topics that interest them. My brother notes that we as a society need to do a better job at embracing neurodiversity. This begins with learning and knowing. It's not about fixing neurodiverse people, but about making our society suit many types of minds. Neurodiversity is part of human diversity. It should not be feared or stigmatized, but celebrated. After all, our differences define us. Knowing and accepting neurodiversity can result in a more inclusive and innovative society. So let's initiate the conversation and welcome our neurodiverse friends, family members, and colleagues. Neurodiversity almost certainly applies to people in this room. Me. People we love, people we care for, and people we admire. The adaptations that neurodiverse individuals make are so often brilliant, but we know they can be difficult. We can look at so many of the Unitarian Universalist principles and relate them to how society accepts and doesn't accept neurodiversity. The first three principles read to me as interrelated aspects of how we can see difference as connection itself. We must see all neurodiversity as part of the human experience, worthy of dignity. We must show compassion when society doesn't map onto the natural rhythms of neurodiversity. And we must accept and encourage the growth of neurodiversity as part of the larger human community. Reverend Emily Gage from the Unity Temple in Chicago writes that the second principle of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations reminds us that treating people as human beings is not simply something we do one-on-one, but something that has systemic implications and can inform our entire cultural way of being. That last point is so integral to how we can apply this understanding of the diversity of human experience to not only our day-to-day interactions, but to the ways our systems ask people to conform to experiences that contravene their needs. There is no specific call to arms here, because autistic and other neurodiverse advocates are the leaders of that charge. I, today, am here to convey the vitality of that experience, to translate between languages, to interpret the data, and relay a fundamental truth I've experienced living between worlds. To be neurodiverse is to be human. It is to be a father, a mother, a brother, a son, a sister, a daughter, a friend. To be neurodiverse is to be human more than anything else I can tell you. Thank you so much. We can do that now, or I think
We'll have
after.
a talk back after the service.
Yeah, okay.
Great job, David.
Thank you so much.
Eitan has called upon us to live the principles that we articulate as Unitarian Universalists in an excellent way. I really thank him, as I think we all do, for that message and calling us to live our values. We now turn to time for generosity. We give to remind ourselves how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space. We give with the faith that together we have enough. We invite you to join us in an offering that allows us to exercise this all-important generosity of spirit by placing your offering in the basket at the back of the church as you leave, or by an online gift at uuflint.org. All gifts of treasure, time, and talent are very gratefully accepted. We will extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. The postlude is "This Must Be the Place" by the Talking Heads. And as I said, there will be a talk back after the service.
head in the sky. It's okay, I know nothing's wrong, nothing. Oh, I have plenty of time. Oh, you got light in your eyes, and you're standing here beside me. I love the passing of time, never for money, always for love. Cover up and say goodnight, say goodnight. Home is where I want to be, but I guess I'm already there. I come home, she lifted up her wings. I guess that this must be the place. I can't tell one from the other. Did I find you or you find me? There was a time before we were born. Someone else, this is where I'll be, where I'll be. Oh, we're drifting in out. Oh, singing to my mouth. Out of all those kinds of people, you got a face with a view. I'm just an animal looking for a woman. Should have seen space for a minute or two, and you love me till my heart stops. Love me till I'm dead. I sit right up, I see through you. Cover up the blank spots, hit me on the head. I got.
This is the service. Those who wish to do so can stay for the talk back. Those who would rather go downstairs immediately now for a coffee hour are welcome to.
So, for those of you who don't know, Ray Rust, our new moderator, is the guy that jumps up and takes the mic to people. So I noticed he wasn't here, and since I'm an usher, I thought I would do it. Raina's doing it. I just want to make a comment. During that last song, I saw Sherry and Julie and Raina and a whole bunch of other, mainly women, who were dancing in their seats. Raina, you want to? So, Harold, I'll get him.
Hey, Ton, could you get to a microphone somehow so we can have this online? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does this work? Excellent.
Does this work?
Sounds good.
John, first of all, I have a brief announcement I'd like to make at the end, but I'd like the comment to be about the service. So, good morning. I was a public educator for 43 years, from about 1971 through 2014, something like that. And as you probably know, the laws with regard to special needs students was in a process of changing dramatically as a classroom teacher, as a director of a scholarship program, and an administrator. I saw that firsthand. We went in the right direction in terms of federal laws and state laws that provided for children with special needs. It took it from the dark ages to a place of enlightenment, and I wonder if you have any comment about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for your years of service. That's incredible. And, you know, I think my experience working at the Centerpoint School was really revelatory. We were a school designed for kids with a myriad of special needs. And one of the things that still shocked me was, I began my work there probably in 2012. And we still, even during that era, had kids that were isolated, that were locked in rooms because of quote unquote behaviors, right? And we had kids that were restrained physically because, yeah, I get it, they're dangerous in some ways, right? But we didn't listen. We didn't listen to what they needed as a society. And so I do see the change. There has absolutely been change, and it has been enlightening, right? It has been so necessary for people to see what behavior is asking for, where behavior stems from. And so, yeah, I have seen similar changes. I mentioned in Oregon, right? These things do vary by state also. Sometimes they vary by county, they vary by funding, right? They vary by, what sorts of resources school districts have. Exactly. And so there's still a good amount of variance. There's still work to be done, certainly. But I absolutely agree, and I think it's a blessing, but still a work in progress.
Thank you for your information. I really appreciated that. I guess I want to just add that the lens of gender and race make this extremely complicated, particularly in public school settings. I don't know that we're yet cognizant of the intersectionality of all of these things, and I know from my own experience that young Black boys tend to be more severely disciplined and misjudged in terms of what their needs are. Some of them may or may not be on the spectrum, as you've talked about it, but it's repeated over and over again. And I remember being aghast when we started kicking 3-year-olds out of daycare because of behavior issues. And so it isn't just the traditional school settings, it's also in early childhood settings as well that we need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's just well said. I don't have much to add other than I think that's a critical component here. And I also think one principle as a social worker that I've learned is behavior is almost always asking for something, right? It doesn't matter what the behavior is. There's a need that underlies that behavior. Sometimes the behavior can be scary. Sometimes it can be quote unquote aggressive, or sometimes it's just perceived in those ways. And so I think that is a really astute and vital comment. So thank you for sharing.
One thing I want to comment. I just saw heard interview on David Byrne with Terry Gross on Fresh Air. It was so good, and he talks about how what you talk about, that persistence. In his high school, he couldn't make the cut to get into the choir, but it didn't stop him. He just did his own music, and he talked about how his music, maybe the repetitiveness and different things were probably related, and social skills he didn't really realize he didn't have were later, more better understood, about how he still made it in the world. And my husband, Fred, has dyslexia. And again, he did not let that stop him. He would take AP classes in high school that he really didn't belong in and get D's in, but he persisted. And he went on, his careers were like, and he focused on engineering, numbers, that type of thing. But he also kept going to find what he really loved, which was photography, and made a living teaching photography. And as a volunteer in schools, we saw you worked with a variety of kids, and and some of the autistic ones, it would be interesting to see how some of them fit into the classrooms and with the other children, and some didn't in different ways, and the importance of that teacher. And that's why I volunteered with this one teacher, because she was so good. It was like, I'm staying with you, whatever you need, because she was so attentive to all of those children. But I did worry about them as they left their classroom.
That's extremely well said, and I think the idea of persistence there, so important. It just illustrates how much harder neurodiverse individuals often have to work to get to the same point. It might not be the point they are looking to get to, right? It's the point society is asking or demanding or, prescribing them to get to. And so, yeah, just a great example, and sounds like a beautiful way to express oneself and find their own path. So thanks for sharing.
I have several girlfriends who have a sensitivity to noise or light, and you said something about the sensitivity. Well, they evidently hear things louder than the average people. So they're annoyed when they go into a bar or something and everybody's having a good time and they say, oh, this is too loud. This is too loud. Or my newest friend says, no, I don't like the light. I don't want to sit near the light. I don't know. And I guess I'm thinking, I'm from a drug program myself, that maybe there's a drug for this, but because it can be annoying for other people because you don't know what to do to solve their uncomfort and make yourself happy too. And so I don't know if they fall under a certain category, but it ended up in an argument the other night with this lady, and then she said that I don't understand her feelings because she doesn't feel the warmth of a family, and only she can understand that. And I said, well, yeah, but sometimes your families are not that friendly, or you can't get along with your family. So, and she kept saying, well, you don't understand my feelings. And I said, well, I have had problems with some of my family.
Well, it sounds like an excellent opportunity for the principle of compassion to be put into practice, right? Compassion has to be an act. It has to be active, right? It has to be something we do. And so that sounds like a good opportunity, but I think it's important to remember that sensory perception is it's really the gateway to all information is our human senses, right? And so some people are tuned differently, and it doesn't necessarily represent autism, ADHD, or neurodiversity, right? There are things like there's a condition being researched called the highly sensitive person, which is, perhaps similar. And so, of course, I can't diagnose, I don't know your friends, but it definitely sounds like there's work to be done. And I think it could be very, very useful to, to invest in that idea of compassion two ways, right? It's a two-way street. I think you said it well, not even in families, we don't always feel that. And so if we can actively practice that, I think that is the first step into a welcoming, integrative world. Yeah. Our next speaker is right here. Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Ramona. My son is 35 now.
Okay.
But when he was in second grade, the teacher diagnosed him as ADHD. And when we found out that there was a drug for that, we disregarded the drug and helped him with all of his homework. He got through second grade just fine. Then he gets into third grade and he gets diagnosed again by the teacher as ADHD and they wanted us to do the Ritalin. And we again said no, and we switched teachers for him. And that teacher worked with him creatively the whole year. And I just was wondering what you know about that going on in schools.
It's a great question. I think that illustrates a really important point, that there are many pathways to success, to dealing with issues. For some people and their ADHD, those kinds of, they're called amphetamine salts, those kinds of medication, Ritalin, Concerta, things like that, they're absolutely necessary, right? People can't focus, people can't sleep, people can't, live the life they choose to live. And so for some people, it really is important. And sometimes that starts at an early age. But for me, for example, right, I never took anything like that. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have benefited, but I think it did allow me some space and some creativity in problem solving, right? And so I think the most important thing is there was somebody there that was willing to do the work, right? There was somebody there to meet your son where he was at, and so I can't say specifically what his needs or what needs are universal, because as we learned, like, these things are so individualized. They vary just like our hairstyles and our hair color and eye color and all of these things. But I think the vital thing here is somebody was willing to do the work. Yeah. Exactly. Not just his teacher, mom and dad as well.
Harold would like to respond to this specifically.
They can't make that diagnosis today the way they did then. The law is very specific. I sat in on many of those IEPC meetings. You have to have an administrator, you have to have the parents, you have to have a social worker, and others, and it's a team decision, including the family and school officials. You can no longer, on your own, diagnose a student as being a special needs student, as apparently what happened with your son.
What happened is, right at that time, my mother had died, and with her inheritance, we took him to Mott Children's Hospital to have his brain measured. And we spent 4 hours in the waiting room, kind of like, biting our fingers. The doctor came out and he said there's nothing wrong with him. He doesn't fit into the school system. And he goes, I suggest this. At the October conferences, when you meet the new teacher, suggest that when the teacher has them memorize a list, to explain why they should learn that list, because then they can go into space travel, or they can do, whatever. They can run a ship. They can, something practical in life that list relates to. And every teacher said, well, that'll be good for the whole class. Mm-hmm.
Well said. Thank you.
I've got something too, because
Question here.
Okay, this is on the same subject, because I had the same experience. I had the same experience when my son was in first grade. They wanted to put him on, and I took him to the doctor first to check, and his pediatrician said, there's no way this child needs to be on something like this. He's bored.
Sure.
Because he asked me whether or not he could play with a train set at home. I said, yeah, he plays with them for hours. He builds Legos. He reads his own books, all this. And I did what I thought was appropriate, talked to the principal and got him changed to a different teacher. It made a world of difference. The one teacher that he had was having almost a third of her students put on Ritalin. And this was back in the early, mid-70s.
Very interesting.
A question I have, when I was a student in school, and even when my children were in school, I don't remember any of the kids being autistic. Now I feel like I could easily name 10 families that have diagnosed autistic children. It feels like an explosion to me in our society. I think it's more than just more people are being diagnosed. Is there an increased number? Do we have any idea why?
Well, people have been autistic for thousands of years. People have been autistic since people existed. And so I think the lens is wider, right? We understand what autism is much better than we used to, right? And we understand the spectral nature, that autism isn't just one way of looking, one way of being, one way of acting, right? And that's kind of the professional understanding in the field of why there are so many more diagnoses. One, because there's just better professional education. Teachers, even though they're not diagnosing, right, teachers are still integral, right? When we do these professional neuropsych evaluations, oftentimes they'll send questionnaires to the teachers, right? And so, teachers understand it better, right? Parents understand it better and advocate. They speak up for their kids more than they used to. Not always, right? But more than they used to. They will say, hey, this isn't my kid being stubborn, right? This is my kid needing something else, right? And so I think our lens is so much wider. We see so much more. And that's why it feels like an explosion, because we're studying it more. We're learning more about what autism is, what it isn't, what it can be. And so because of those things, I think a lot of people wonder, is this, confirmation bias? Are we just looking for it more and so we see it more? But I think we study it more so we understand more. And that's why we match these diagnoses to what people need. It's a genetic condition, so that would be my guess. But I don't know. It's a good question.
I'd like this to be our last question, and then we can head for coffee.
Mike Haley also wants to speak, and Harold has an announcement.
It's past time. We usually
We have
call
two.
time.
This is about the time we began the talk back. It was a shorter service.
Yeah. John, Mike, Harold.
Who's up?
You are. Go.
Okay. You mentioned your father is a doctor.
Yep.
And I wonder if you're familiar with a TV show on ABC called The Good Doctor, where the lead character is on the spectrum. And I wonder if you could comment as to whether or not the evolution of his, whatever you want to call it, is realistic, and in that sense, a contribution to the audience for that show's understanding of the spectrum, or is it oversimplified in your opinion?
It's a great question. I was actually thinking about including just some notes in my talk about things like the Big Bang Theory and whatnot, and The Good Doctor. My old supervisor at the Centerpoint School actually loved that show. She commented that there was a lot there that fit, right? But it's also important to remember it's Hollywood, right? And so it's really going to scratch the surface. It's just going to describe one person. You know, there's a very, very common phrase in the autistic community. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, right? And so it's not inaccurate, right? They are definitely capturing something in that show. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about the evolution of it. But it is important to remember it's the representation of one person, right? And so, yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Mike, how does social media affect neurodiversity? And how does Trump fit in all this? Now we need an hour.
Well, you can come to my second talk on empathy about the last part. Regarding social media, I think it has been a really invaluable and useful tool for people to understand themselves and feel less alone. Because a lot of autistic and neurodiversity advocates use social media as their platform, right? YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. These are things we need to take with a grain of salt, right? Because you get a lot of nonsense on social media too, right? But generally my impression is that almost everybody I've worked with on an individual basis has learned something either about themselves or how to cope with reality, how to cope with life via social media. And so it's just like tool, right? You know, it's like any tool. You don't want to use a hacksaw to screw a screw in, right? But if you need to, if you need to cut a plank of wood, that saw is going to come in handy. And so I think social media has been really helpful for a lot of the folks I work with, and you need to be cautious. A lot of charlatans out there, of course, but in general, I have found it to be useful as a connective tool. It helps people feel less alone.
Very briefly, I would like to make a gift of alone this morning. I looked at the UUCF website before I came here. I found out that the book club in the fall was a book that sounded familiar. I went on my shelves and I found it. The Sun Does Shine, Anthony Ray Hinton. There's an African-American man who was sentenced to life imprisonment for a murder that he did not commit, and I highly recommend this book. I did not mark this one up with highlighter and notes and like I usually do. I wrote on pages just 2 very short vignettes to whet your appetite. He started a book club when he was in prison, and there were 7 in the club. One of them arrived at the day of execution, and the next time the club met, they just left a chair empty. There were 6 members in an empty chair. The second vignette was a little more optimistic. Ray, the author of this book, used the power of imagination. For example, the Queen of England, he traveled to foreign lands, and quote, "I had already won Wimbledon 5 times, and I married Halle Berry on a Sunday." So if anybody wants to borrow it, I'm here to loan it this morning. It's a great book. Okay.
Thank you, Harold, and thank you, everyone. Wow. Great service, Charles.